Hello, I'm Emma-Louise Coffey and you're welcome to the Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. On this week's episode, grassland researcher Tomás Tubritt gives a step-by-step guide to the reseeding process to maximise the sward's productive life, including reseeding methods, new cultivar selection traits and post-reseeding management.
What we would recommend is that farmers should be targeting about 10% of their farm area to reseed per year. And the rationale for that, Emma-Louise, is by doing it that way, you're reseeding, say, your paddocks on your farm once in every 10 years. And that's even if your swards are lasting longer than 10 years, which they will under good management, you still might be losing out on genetic gain if you have older cultivars on your farm. So by reseeding one in every 10 years, you're kind of maximizing the genetics of the grass on your farm. And also you might see, or I've definitely seen it on farms this year, but the spring response of reseeded paddocks is quite high. So if you reseeded last May or June, you'll definitely see a response from it the following spring compared to more existing patterns on your farm. So I do think it's very important to have a routine of reseeding once or 10% per year.
Talk through the selection criteria. So, how are farmers to make that decision as to what exact paddocks or what exact area they're targeting to reseed this year?
What we would hope is happening on farms is that farmers are walking their farm regularly. And what this allows farmers to do is to produce their annual tonnage report on Pasture Base. And then that's a very quick way of looking at the graph and seeing which are the lowest producing paddocks on your farm. So like we'd be expecting, say the average farm, the top paddocks on his farm are maybe producing 12 to 14 tons of dry matter per hectare, but some lower ones could be producing lower than 10. And it's these fields that are producing less than 10 tons of dry matter, or maybe just the lowest performing ones on the farm, that need to be investigated and likely need to be the criteria paddocks for reseeding. If you're not doing your farm walks, you perhaps might have an indication of how long your rotation lengths are. So your best performing paddocks, you find that you're getting back into those paddocks every 3 weeks, every 21 days, while there's some paddocks on your farm that it might take maybe 25 days to get to your target pre-grazing height. And that's another indication that these fields are less productive. They likely have a lower level of perennial ryegrass plants within the sward, and that's causing this lower performance from those paddocks, and they're the ones that you need to be targeting with reseeding.
And if we consider then the methods and let's talk through the process of reseeding, can you give us an indication of the most popular methods from an Irish context, and maybe what is optimum on a dairy farm, with a higher stocking rate, silage ground is out, you want to reseed, you want a fast turnaround time, and you also want to retain that top layer of nutrients that you're applying to your ground.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so taking all those points into account, Emma-Louise, what we found from Teagasc research is that the method of reseeding does not tend to affect the establishment of the new grass reseed, and it won't affect subsequent performance in future years. And like you said, we are looking for a turnaround of about 6 weeks from the time you cultivate that soil to getting your first grazing on the paddock. I'd say the most reliable and probably the most popular method of reseeding is ploughing. But farmers really need to take care that it's a shallow job done with ploughing, because like you said, you don't want to be burying all this fertile soil that's in the top proportion of the paddock. That would probably be closely followed by minimum tillage, and it's probably the gap between farmers choosing the plough and choosing the min-till is probably closing. I suppose, seeing as we found no difference in the effectiveness of both methods, it's really down to farmer preference. So if you take the advantages of ploughing, like I said, it's probably more repeatable or more reliable method of reseeding, but you have the disadvantages then that you're turning over probably more soil, and also you're likely to bring up more stones into these paddocks, and that's going to require more labor to remove them. if you take the minimum tillage method of reseeding, what you're likely going to be left with is more trash on the surface, and this trash it's dead grass, so it will rot away over time, but you find that it maybe affects the establishment of the new seedling grasses a bit more, and this dead grass is rotting away and it's producing acids. So it's very important that if you are going to min-till, it's important to apply at least 2 tons of lime to neutralize these decaying acids, and to help the seedlings to grow. Also, at minimum tillage, we're likely to probably have an increased weed burden, because the weeds aren't being buried as effectively as they would be with ploughing. But a good herbicide regime after sowing should be enough to control these weeds and to fix that problem. Our other methods are stitching in, which can work on farms. Probably the place I'd see them work best is maybe if you reseeded recently, the sward is just a bit open and you're just wanting to add more perennial ryegrass to fill in that open space. In like existing swards that are already quite dense, and you just want to refresh with new grass, they're likely not to work as effectively, because these new seedling grasses are going to be crowded out by the dense sward that's already there. So if you have kind of established grassland and you're thinking of reseeding, a better option is a full reseed as opposed to a stitching in job.
And to pick up on a few points there, and you mentioned weeds, and essentially where you're doing minimum tillage, you may have a stronger weed burden. I suppose if we consider, we're going out in the morning to reseed a paddock, there are weeds within the swards. When are we tackling the weed control there and trying to eliminate weeds from the paddock? Is it before, is it during the process, or is it after the process of reseeding? What would you recommend?
It's all the above there, Emma-Louise, because your first step is to apply your Roundup or your glyphosate, and that needs to be applied a minimum of 10 days, and we would recommend 14 days before you actually go in and cultivate the soil. So you need to be planning, and the Roundup needs that long to act in the plant, because it'll go onto the leaves of dock is probably your most problem weed. It'll be applied to the dock, but in order for the Roundup to actually work into the large tap root of that dock, it really does need the 2 weeks to kill that root. Because if you're anywhere earlier with doing your cultivation, you're left with this the tap root of the dock, which can then reseed after the resowing event, and then that's going to be a lot harder to kill than your little seedling docks that are emerging from seeds that are already present in the seed bank. So I suppose these seedling docks that I'm talking about, these are the ones that you're after disturbing the soil, which is after moving the soil around these seeds, and that's what causes these dock seeds to germinate. But these docks have a very, very shallow root system, and therefore when you go in with your post-emergent spray, now the timing of the post-emergent spray can be quite variable, I find, but when you do tackle that with your seedling docks and seedling thistles and stuff like that, you're bound to get a kill on that compared to your established dock that's regrowing from taproot. That's what the Roundup is tackling, that established dock, whereas your post-emergent herbicide is going to tackle these seedling docks. And for the timing for the say the post-emergent herbicide, really what you need to be looking at is, so the recommendations are going to be, you want to be applying that maybe 4 to 8 weeks, somewhere around there, before so you're letting the seedling docks come up. They're going to be about the size of a €2 coin, and then you're going to spray them then, and then you're going to that should hopefully kill it, and then you're going to start your pre-grazing management of these swards. But I've seen it on farms, and it's happened to me myself, where maybe the spray goes a bit late and growth rates are very high, and there's a withdrawal date on applying the spraying when you can graze it. And for some of these products, it's as long as 2 weeks. And in that 2 weeks, there's massive amount of growth, and then you're not actually grazing these new reseeds at the target pre-grazing yield of 800. You're probably gone more likely to maybe 1200 or 1400, and it's a bit higher than we'd be recommending. So if growth rates are high, you probably need to get in earlier with your post-emergent herbicide. If growth rates are that bit slower, you're probably looking at 5 to 6 weeks would be the optimum time to be spraying these weeds that are coming up with the new grass.
And I guess another point that you made was, with the minimum till, the lime would be very important. But can you step us through the fertilizer protocol that you would recommend with the reseed?
Yeah, as I said earlier, if you're minimum tillage, you're already going to be spreading lime on the field as best management, and that's to neutralize the acids that are being produced from the minimum tillage. So hopefully, if you are going to be doing a reseeding job, you're already after taking your soil sample from that field, and ideally that soil sample has been taken in the close period, so back in autumn or winter of last year. And this is going to obviously tell you your pH, your P index, and your K index. So if the soil test is recommending you need to apply lime to increase the pH of the soil, reseeding is an optimum time to apply this lime to the field. Like I said, a minimum of 2 ton if your minimum tillage ground, and that will be up to a maximum of 3 tons of lime at reseeding. And if the soil does require more, if it requires more lime as per your soil test recommendations, that can be applied then later on in the season around September time. So that's your lime requirement, a maximum of 3 ton of lime to be applied to fields that need it, that need lime. With regards to your P and K indexes, so as a first thing, these new growing seedlings are going to require 30 units of nitrogen at reseeding, and that's to promote the growth of the seedlings. And if your soils are at index 3 for P and index 3 for K, they're going to require 30 units of P, and they're going to require a minimum of 50 units of K to stimulate growth in those crops. As you go down the indexes there, so if you have a soil P index of 2, you're going to have to apply an extra 15 units. So that's 45 units of P on index 2 soils. And for an index 1 soil, you're going to be applying another 15. So or another 10. So that's 50 units of P to be applied. And for the K indexes, a K index of 2 will require 65 units of K, and a K index of 1 is going to require 80 units. And also, it's probably good to note that if you are planning on reseeding fields and you're going to be reseeding fields that are already index 1s for both P and K, it might be a good idea to not reseed those fields this year, but rather to invest money in increasing the indexes of those fields now in anticipation for reseeding in the following year, because new perennial ryegrass seedlings that you grow in your paddocks, they are very nutrient hungry, and if they're getting reduced amounts of P and K, they're likely going to die and be replaced by weeds and weed grasses. So it might be a priority on farms to actually do their nutrient management program first and getting their soil indices into the right place before they target a reseeding job on those paddocks.
Yeah, and as you say, it may be a 2-year process on some farms, and this probably is a really good time to pull out those soil fertility results from the kind of winter period and analyse where the paddocks are at in conjunction with the I guess the measurements from Pasture Base. Looking then to the cultivars or the mixes that farmers will select for reseeding, you mentioned the genetics of the new seeds that are becoming available, and I guess it's very much like like we're talking about the EBI. It's a very similar concept, but I guess. What traits are people targeting for grass-based systems from what you can see, Tomás?
As most of your listeners will know, the grass variety selection tool that is recommended by Teagasc and department and the wider seed industry is the Pasture Profit Index. So this is created every year from data from the department recommended list trials and from trials here in Teagasc Moore Park, and very similar to the EBI, it ranks the varieties across a number of traits. Higher performance in a trait gives you a higher economic value, and that's how you're going to select the varieties. So the traits, primarily for dairy farmers, the traits that you're selecting on is really going to depend on the intended paddock use over the next few years. So obviously a large proportion of dairy farms is going to be on your grazing platform. And the traits that farmers need to be selecting for those fields is going to be spring herbage growth, because spring herbage growth is when we really need the grass in the system. There's a plentiful of grass in summer, but when we need grass in the system, it's advantageous to have good spring growth in your cultivars. And also you want to be looking at the quality sub-index. And new to the PPI this year is the Teagasc grazing utilisation trait. And this has been the basis of my PhD for the past number of years, where we've evaluated plots in grazing plots here in Teagasc Moor Park. The cows come in and graze them on 21-day rotations, and we're assessing how well they're grazed by the animals, because we know increased utilization of grass is going to increase net profit. So we want, our dairy farmers want varieties that are going to be well grazed by cows. They don't have to go in and top them, which is another labor saving and stuff like that. So those are the three main traits that farmers should be targeting on their grazing platforms. There also might be some farmers who have out farms and are planning on getting 2 or 3 proper cuts of silage off those fields. And then what the farmers should be focusing on for those intended paddocks is to be following the silage sub-index within the Pasture Profit Index. That's taken from the department recommended list trials, that they run a proper silage protocol where, you know, the fields or the plots are closed for 6 weeks, then they're taking their first cut, they're closed for another 5 to 6 weeks, and they get a second cut. So you're getting a really good, accurate indication of what varieties are suitable for silage systems. And then lastly, there might be some farmers who are using them probably more in a general purpose type system, where they expect to get maybe 1 or 2 silage cuts off them, but also want to get some indication of good grazing in these swards as well, particularly maybe for heifers on their farm and that. And the main traits to follow for those type of paddocks will be your silage sub-index and also your grazing utilization sub-index. They're the key traits to be selecting on for those type of paddocks.
And talk us through your recommendation on, you've given us an indication of the traits that we should look at, but looking at one cultivar as opposed to looking at a mix, what would be best there, and what would be the difference?
So Teagasc have been running this on-farm monoculture trial for the past 7 or 8 years. It's a simple trial where we are sowing just single varieties in paddocks on farms all across Ireland. There's over 100 farms involved in this trial, and the farmer is then managing that paddock as he does any other paddocks on his farm, and we're gaining data off that from Pasture Base Ireland. And the feedback that we're getting back from farmers is that they're more than happy to sow monocultures of varieties in their swards, that they see no difference between sowing a mixture that they've selected to be high performing in their traits that they want, and between one single monoculture that performs equally as well in all those desired traits. So if you can find a variety on the PPI list that is performing well in the 2 or 3 main traits that you want in that field, well, then I would strongly recommend selecting monocultures for that reason. Perhaps the only disadvantage to sowing monocultures is maybe seed availability, particularly for newer varieties, might be a bit less, so it might be hard to actually get enough grass seed to sow as a monoculture. But if that option is there for you, I would recommend it, all right. And when it comes to variety selection for mixtures, it can get quite complicated, and I think it's probably needlessly slow, or has been in the past when we haven't had the data. But if we take heading date, the heading dates between varieties they've been getting narrower and narrower for the past 20 years. Like the range now in the list is ranging from about maybe the 24th of May until the 11th of June, where in the past that could have been going up to maybe the 16th or the 20th of June. So the range is getting smaller. And in plot work I've done here in Moor Park for the last 2 or 3 years, we've sowed mixtures of perennial ryegrass varieties with wide heading dates and with narrow heading dates. And we found that in a rotational grazing system, grazed every 21 days, there was no difference between the variety performance. So particularly if you are going to be putting on your grazing pattern and going to be getting the grazings off them, I don't see this large effect of heading date having as much of an influence on paddock performance. When we get to silage quality, it probably still is wise to keep your heading date as narrow as possible, as if the varieties included in your silage mix are heading at different dates, they're going to be losing quality at different rates, and it's probably more preferable just to have them at around a similar date for silage harvesting and stuff like that.
And Tomás, then looking to clover, and that's something that, you know, a lot of farmers now are including or thinking of including in the mix. You know, what type of clover are you looking at selecting for grazing swards on the milking platform?
Clover, it's becoming, I suppose, more recognised as an important aspect of, it has an important role to play within grazing swards in Ireland. It can lead to lower levels of nitrogen being applied and can also lead to higher levels of performance on perennial ryegrass swards. So we are definitely recommending, especially on grazing swards, that the inclusion of clover be included into your reseeding mix. What we're recommending, the types of clover to sow are generally your small to medium leaf size clovers. So we know the advantages of these. They're, compared to the large ones, they're not as likely to take over the swards as much, and they'll still fix the nitrogen that you need and also give you yield and animal performance advantage as well. They'd be the ones I'd be recommending for grassland swards.
And looking then to grazing management of a new reseed, and you mentioned previously that, you know, you're targeting that first grazing at a cover of 800 kilos dry matter per hectare. Can you take us through the first 2 or 3 grazings and how exactly you're managing that? Like, to some people, you know, I think in the past we liked to see a lot of grass in a reseed before you'd let cows in, but obviously the mindset has changed slightly on that.
Yeah, so if we're after doing our reseeding job, and it's been rolled, and now we're starting to see the seedlings come up. The field will look quite angish for a long while, and depending on grow conditions, that's going to dictate when you're going back in to graze it. What you found for the last 2 years is, in 2018 we had the drought in June, and reseeds were looking quite miserable around those times. And then last year we also found, even if people went that bit earlier in May, we also got a drought and some reseeds seemed to struggle. But if you do get, you know, good to reasonable grow conditions, you're expecting to be back in those paddocks within 6 weeks. And over those 6 weeks, we're expecting a cover of about 800 to be on those paddocks. And I suppose the reason we want to be grazing these at a lower cover than what we were grazing the other paddocks on the farm is that we're trying to encourage tillering of the plant. And by getting in and grazing them, and not grazing them down to the butt, but it's just literally getting your cows to run over it, just give it a bit of a clipping, and that's going to encourage the fields to tiller. I suppose in the past also, it might have been suggested to use your calves or stuff like that to graze these reseeds. But what I see is, I think getting a large number of cows to graze them, not graze it too tightly, but give it a bit of a clipping, they can get over the field in a far shorter length of time. So the cows are only in for one grazing, and then you can take them off again, and then the field can just start regrowing again, and you're kind of left with a more even regrowth on those fields, as opposed to this prolonged grazing and then prolonged regrowth. And then, like I was saying as well, if we are planning to graze at 800, we need to be proactive in the time we're spraying. So, like I said, some products, I know the Corteva products they have a 7-day withdrawal, which is probably more easier to manage, but there is some products that they require a 14-day interval between spraying the field and between grazing it. And we all know how much grass can grow, say in May, over 2 weeks. So it is about being keeping an eye on the paddock and kind of making the decision early that I'm going to spray it now, and then I'll be able to graze it. And you could also say that it's probably better to get your spray on and get it grazed right, because if more weeds come up afterwards, it can always be sprayed again. So that is probably the recommendations that we'd be given. Make sure that you're grazing it at 800 and working your spray protocol around your grazing date rather than working your grazing date around when you sprayed it.
Thank you, Tomás. I think we've gotten a good refresher in terms of what is best practice and the options across best practice that we can implement from our own situation. I think, from listening to you, we're starting with the basics of, selecting those lower producing paddocks, checking out the soil fertility, and then putting a plan in place in terms of the method we're going to use, the varieties we're going to select, and putting that fertiliser plan and grazing plan in place for the reseed. Thank you, Tomás.
Thanks, Emma.
That's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast, and my thanks to Tomás Tubritt for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and join me next time for your Dairy Edge.